some thoughts. What do you associate with the term scaling? What do you think of when you hear it? Or what have you read about?
For me, it's just getting maybe a bigger audience for our idea, and like when we brought the product to market, just increasing our revenue streams, increasing our business in general.
So scaling is about increasing the business, increasing your revenues, and also increasing your audience. But you mean in terms of customers, or what do you think? What do you mean by audience?
I think it can be divided in two stages. First of all, increasing the audience in our focus audience group and our focus customer groups, and then maybe extending it to other customer groups.
Okay, but mainly you focus on the customer, and and that's surely this is surely what scaling is about. Other ideas and inputs. Uwe.
Yes, I would also say, so I completely agree with the growth aspect of scaling, but I would also say that there's some aspect of efficiency to it. So you can make more out of the same resources. So you scale something up, it gets cheaper, for example, and thus you're more efficient.
So you're pointing to different forms of scaling already, right? So first one, Roman focused on how do you enlarge your customer base, and you can do it by, for instance, offering more products or addressing new customer groups, as Roman was indicating. But you can, of course, do that by reducing your costs and increasing efficiency. And by this means, automatically, without increasing the resources that you invest, address a larger customer base. Yes, surely. Other ideas, Simon?
Yes, traditionally, like Roman already said, I would say it's after finding your niche, your target group, it's penetrating the market and increasing revenue. And I just want to add that in our case, as social entrepreneurs, we of course also want to scale the impact. That's an important thing here, I would say.
That's an important aspect. And surely addressing a larger customer base is one way to do so, right? So the examples that have been given surely go into that direction. Slatika, you have another view or idea?
I was thinking about maybe scaling the number of the employees that can help to kind of make the growth of the business, or to help to kind of maybe even to help to reduce the risks, or to prevent some like to bring the knowledge, and also to help the business to rise.
Yeah, so you again a little bit like Uwe point to the question, how do you exactly realize the growth, right? So you can do that by increasing efficiency, and by this means addressing more people with the same resources, or you can of course enhance the resources that you use, like the number of employees, which is surely human capital is surely an important resource for social enterprises, and by this means addressing a larger number of people. Other ideas? Okay, I think that was a great start. Thank you for that. So let's get back to our slides. And I think you have mentioned many important aspects of scaling that for now focus a little bit on the organizational growth, right? What does it mean for an organization exactly to scale? It can mean, of course, different things. And Roman, you raised an important point, namely that social enterprises, here organization A as an example, are focused on creating impacts, right? So creating a social impact, having a positive social effect, or an ecological effect, or both actually. So it's about the organization and the impact. Typically, social enterprises start from, as we were talking about earlier, from experimenting with new ideas, with new concepts, with new products, with new services. So typically, in this experimentation phase, the impact of the organization is quite limited. So for instance, you have a certain small number or group of beneficiaries that you want to help with your solution. It's perhaps limited to a national or even small geographical region. You want to help out the people in your city, for instance. And then throughout, you can think while stabilizing your model and testing what works, what didn't work, and improving your model, optimizing it over time, you probably tend to want to increase your impact. Or most social enterprises at some point think about how can we grow our impact. So now everything new is not so new anymore. We have some standards, some practices that we know how to use. The daily business works as it is, and now we can invest more time and effort towards growing our impact. And as you said, some of you said earlier, growing the customers or the beneficiary base is a typical way of how organizations can grow as organizations, right? So you can have new customers in a new region, or you can address customers from different age groups, for instance. So this is a typical way of growing as an organization. You can also diversify your offerings and into new areas of activity. Like in the beginning, for instance, you focus on education on food, and then you can also increase offerings and education on other health-related issues. So you can diversify more or less strongly. You can also change the focus of your organization when you identify that you have another idea that is perhaps better suitable to having a larger impact. But typically, there is only as much as you can do as one organization. So what social enterprises often also do as a form of scaling is not necessarily growing as an organization, but to increase or to enhance the adoption of their model. So to make other organizations or other groups of entrepreneurs in other cultural contexts, for instance, adopting their idea, copying their business models to some extent, surely with some adaptations to the local environment, and then providing similar offerings in different contexts. So the ideas of replicating the model, of building networks, or also of social franchising relates to the idea where you not necessarily grow as an organization, but try to make sure that your ideas, your concepts, and the business models and strategies that you have tested and that work, you have proved to work, are adopted by other organizations in other contexts. And the third way of growing your impact that we want to talk about today too is that you really scale your impact through broader diffusion or dissemination of ideas. So it's not only to make or to try to make sure that other organizations adopt your model, but to initiating change on a larger scale, to raise awareness for certain topics, right? So that's why I asked in the beginning what you meant by audience. Your audience can be your customers and beneficiaries, but this can be also a broader, the entire society, right? When you engage, for instance, as a social entrepreneur in communicating, in making presentations, giving talks, you could also contribute to, for instance, changing consumer behavior overall, to raise awareness and visibility for certain topics. So, and this typically involves different stakeholders in your environment, right? So it's not only about customers, but also, for instance, making other established firms adopting your models or parts of your models, also addressing the policy actors in order to perhaps adapt institutional frameworks and regulatory frameworks in a way that supports your system. So it's these three different types of scaling: organizational growth, scaling through replication or adoption of ideas, and scaling through broader diffusion that involves the spread of certain ideas and concepts that we want to talk about. And you have a nice summarizing overview, a video in the MOOC that we introduced to you in the beginning. We will, of course, also link it on the website so you can watch it again, where it's also differentiated between growth as an organization, adoption or affiliation, and dissemination or diffusion of ideas. And I think what this figure here nicely indicates that it is a spectrum, right? So it is not a clear-cut distinction between these versions. And oftentimes, social entrepreneurs want to grow as an organization, but at the same time engage in disseminating and diffusing their ideas and concepts. So oftentimes, you can also choose from a mix of these types of growth or scaling strategies. And what is, I think, important to note in particular, but we will discuss this in more detail next week when we go into the group work, is how to select the appropriate scaling strategy for your organization. And simply put, they, of course, differ in terms of how much control do you have as the founder. So when you have more direct growth as an organization, you have, of course, much control. When you disseminate ideas, you give control out of hand, right? So you don't really know what happens. Your ideas might also be used in a way that you didn't plan for, you don't find even appropriate. But this gives at the same time much flexibility to you, right? So because you're not stuck to the resources that you have, or you do not have to cover all the increased costs on your own as an organization, but you have access to many more possibilities by involving others into your endeavor. So there are advantages and disadvantages, and it depends on what is a good fit for your ideas, but also what is a good fit in terms of what are your requirements in terms of control, flexibility, costs, and speed. So what I would like to do next is to guide you through some examples that emphasize one of these strategies quite nicely. And probably many of them you have already heard about. We have chosen some popular examples. Some of them we have already discussed earlier. And one, I think, quite typical or very, surely very successful example of scaling the customer, scaling impact through increasing the customer and beneficiary base is the example of the error-right eye care system. And this was founded in the 1970s in India to avoid needless blindness. So the founder, Dr. V, he identified that 80% of blindness was actually avoidable because it was due to eye cataract, which was treatable, right? So it was not a situation in which nothing could be done anymore. But at that moment, the procedures were too costly for most of the people to have access to it. So what he was actually motivated by was when he first saw the McDonald's sign in India, and he thought, okay, if McDonald's has such a strong sign and everybody understands that you can get certain low-cost burgers from that, why can't we apply some of the ideas of how to produce these burgers to the idea of eye care? So what he developed over time is an operation technique that was very efficient. So you can see it in the picture here on the right side, where you have several patients who lie very closely next to each other. So you don't have to make any breaks between the operations, but can really, like in an assembly line, make one operation after the other. And still it was safe, and hygiene was high, and everything was fine. But it was just a way that reduced much time and also the need for many more nurses, and it was very efficient. And by this means, the organization was able to grow from a small 11-bed hospital to now having running several hospitals across the country and making 400,000 eye surgeries each year. And we will provide you some readings on the case, because it is really quite interesting to learn how they addressed all the difficulties in scaling up, and still were able to focus on their core values in the organizational culture that they promoted. So, for instance, in particular in the beginning, most senior staff in the organization was from the family of the founder. So he had several sisters, and they had husbands, and most of them were actually in the same profession or in similar related medical professions. So he actually made sure that they all worked together to enhance continuity, and also to make sure that the major values that he promoted were stabilized throughout the organization. He introduced what was particularly important, in addition to this assembly line approach, a community funding approach. So only roughly 35%, at least this is the goal number, I'd say, actually pay for their operations. while 65% of the patients do not, because they cannot afford these operations. But the 35 still pay less than for comparable treatment. So for them, it's also a cost advantage. And at the same time, they can help out by supporting many others in their communities to actually profit from that model. So this is surely one particularly successful example of how growth can happen in an organization, how more and more people can be addressed and can be reached, and the customer and beneficiary space can be increased over time. Another example we have already looked at is Grameen. So you surely remember it. Grameen is the microfinance organization, right? Founded to help women in particular to move themselves out of poverty. And what Grameen then did over time was to deliberately looking for business partners from established companies in order to combine their knowledge with Grameen's knowledge, the competencies of the companies with Grameen's competencies, and to develop other business models in completely different industries, but still relying on the knowledge and the experience from Grameen and also the network that they built. So for instance, they developed a cooperation with Telenor to provide telephone services in Bangladesh. They work together with Veolia to provide clear water to rural population, and they work together with Danone to provide food in particular for children. And in each of their corporations, they actually adapted the business models of the original company with whom they were partnering, and to really questioning what is the basic assumption that perhaps does not work, and how do we have to adapt the business models in order to work in the different in the Bangladesh context. So, for instance, considering the cooperation with Grameenphone, the assumption was that buying power in developing countries was very low, and so it was not profitable, and there was no way to build up a profitable wireless network. That's why many firms that tried were not successful. So the idea, of course, is that you own the phone, right, in developed countries, but in developing countries, this is a strategy or an idea that is not affordable by many. So the idea was that you don't have to own the handset, the telephone, the mobile phone, but that you can rent it for only a few minutes. So only when you really need to make a call, you can actually use the phone of somebody else. So they set up what they called, I think, the Grameen ladies, who owned the phones, and who were among the rural population in the communities and were easy to reach. So whenever you needed a call, to make a call, you could approach them and just buy a few minutes. And this and the other cooperations are also very good examples of how you could always question the conventional wisdom and then find a suitable partner. So this puts emphasis on the idea that the partnerships are really important and helpful in this context, and the combination of knowledge and experiences. Another idea also of growing, and this we talked about last time already, so I will not spend much time on this, was we had this great video from the founder of Original Bliss company, who produced fair trade chocolate bars and chocolate, to moving to becoming a cacao company, a cacao academy that mainly focuses on educating farmers on how to be more efficient and also sustainable, and addressing other established companies to make them adapt some of their practices that they found that have proved to work, and also addressing and communicating to policy actors and to NGOs to make sure that the ideas of local farming and the living circumstances of local farmers increase. So she was talking about trying these shooting little bullets and then identifying what is your cannonball. So increasing your impact can also mean doing something different, right, over time, once you have gathered, collected some experiences on what works and what doesn't work so well. So I think what is important perhaps here to add is, this we will focus on that a little bit more later, is that social enterprises do not operate in a vacuum, right? So for most of these strategies, and this is here just for the example of the Cacao Academy, you do need to cooperate with other stakeholders and other partners. So in the case of the Cacao Academy, it was from the beginning the cacao producers, from which were suppliers originally to Bliss GmbH, and provided the cacao to produce the chocolate, and they also very early on started to talk to established chocolate producers to change their approaches and their strategies, to universities and research partners, and also to public authorities and politicians. So what is, I think, important is that there are interdependencies between social enterprises and their environment. And most business models, and in particular when it comes to scaling of impact, really rely on working together with partners, identifying who is relevant and who could help you to overcome certain hurdles. So in the entrepreneurship literature, there is this metaphor, this idea of the ecosystem that has prevailed. And I think without going too much into detail here, what is important is to think of the network participants. So who are the stakeholders, who are the organizations or partners that you need, but also thinking about what is the governance system that you want to develop. So are all equal partners, or is there a central partner that is coordinating others? Which role do you as an organization want to take or can take with regard to the power that you might have and the influence that you might have? So creating such an ecosystem is much more than just identifying who I can work with or who do I need, but to really establish these cooperations, right? And to establish also what is often called a shared logic or a shared goal. So to make sure that everybody's on the same page and that the relations remain stable, ideally over time. Please, whenever you have questions or want some more information, feel free to interrupt. I will talk you through 2 or 3 more examples, but we will in the end provide you and upload some readings to go into more detail if you're more interested, and of course we can discuss it also next week. Another interesting approach to growing a impact is, as indicated earlier, growth through replication, right? So you as an organization might not necessarily want to grow on your own, but want to motivate others to redo what you have done in their local context. And one way to really do that with relatively little resources is to introduce a bricks to clicks model. This means that you develop toolkits that really can be described easily online. You set out how your business model works like and how exactly you work and have been working so far. And through this, users can more or less readily, other groups can more or less readily adopt your models or only need a little support. So one example of this approach is Kaboom. This is an initiative, an NGO in the United States that aims to motivate local communities to create play spaces for children, because in many cities or in most cities, their play spaces are not evenly spread. So in particular in areas that are highly populated by people with a migration background, there are fewer play spaces. And to reduce this inequality, they address in particular these communities. So on the one hand, they go there themselves and build up new play spaces. but they have also developed many toolkits and descriptions of what they do to really, without much influence and without much investments, enabling local communities to develop play spaces themselves. But they are, of course, always, I think, there if any questions or arise or any support is needed. But as such, the number of play spaces that have been created has really increased very, very strongly over the last years by introducing this bricks to clicks model. Another model that or another example of this model is Mikrolandwirtschaft. This is actually an NGO or an association from Mannheim, and they have first developed own community gardens and own local farms in the city. Have tested certain practices, and now on the one hand provide an overview of what organizations are out there. So what they have a map where you can find all the different community gardens and locals farms in Germany, and they also provide material for potential founders of such initiatives, how they can build a community garden, who they have to approach, how they can grow this type of food or this type of food. So they also provide insights from their business model, from their experiences to others openly through their platform in order to really introduce or motivate replications of their initial idea. Okay, so the last model I want to, or idea of how to scale your impact that I want to guide you through is the growth through application, and thereby in particular that you can build networks to do so. So in the overview that from the video that we have to still put online, you have seen that there is a distinction between growth as an organization and affiliation. And one way, so the question is, how much influence do you still have as the founder of your organization, right? When building networks, this is actually also still under negotiation how much influence you as the founder can have. But mostly networks in this context work in the way that they are rather the power is distributed, or that the local entities are rather independent, but they still use, for instance, the same branding or the same brands, that they thus become much more visible and can increase the awareness among customers overall. So actually also lead to a diffusion of ideas. One example from Germany is the Tafeln, where you can, as a person which for a lower income, can go to receive food for free. So they mainly work or only work with donations. It's mainly supermarkets, restaurants who do, or bakeries who have overleft food or food that will expire at some point and cannot be sold anymore. And they give their food to the Tafeln, and there you can go and get some of the food. And there are many of them. In each city, you surely find one or even several, and all of them are completely independent. But they all use the same name of the Tafeln. They all use the same brand, and they also exchange experiences. So there is also some network structure behind it. But in general, it's independent entities. They have to adhere to certain values and goals of the founding organization and some basic principles, but in general they are led independently, and the founder of the original Tafeln is not involved in supervising any of the others. Another example that actually is has been born from a global movement of repair cafes, and I think up until now we have probably 1,500 across the world, and this is also a completely independent network of completely independent entities. So the basic idea was found, I think, in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, roughly 10 10, 15 years ago, where local communities or people who have some repairing skills came together and said, okay, we can offer these skills to our local communities, right? So help people repair their stuff, from a coffee machine to your laptop. You can go there to these events organized by the repair cafes, and whatever you can carry, I think is the motto, you can bring with them. So don't bring your washing machine, but anything else that is small enough to take with you, you can bring there, and people with certain skills will help you to repair it. There's also machinery and tools there, so you don't have to bring any of that or have any of that. And typically it's for free. Of course, you are asked to donate some money, but it is completely up to the customers. And the idea, of course, is to strengthen the local community, so to have some social impact, but also to prolong the life cycles of products, right? I mean, many coffee machines, I don't know, are very difficult to repair and are replaced very early in their life cycle. Computers and other devices also, and this idea of the repair cafes aims to contribute to avoiding this. Again, they are completely independent local initiatives, all using the same logo and trying to exchange on their experiences, but completely independent. And at the same time, through connecting and through using the same logo and the same label, of course, this has increased the visibility of this whole movement, rather than many small repair cafes. If they would have named themselves in a different way, nobody probably would really identify and see them easily. So before I this was so far the overview of the different techniques. We will shortly move to the third topic, so to say, where we focus more strongly on how you can actually contribute to diffuse your ideas. But perhaps before we do that, let's think about what are key challenges of scaling for impact. So now that you have heard some of the examples and seen how others have done it and what possibilities are out there, what do you think? Why isn't it so easy, or what are important challenges? Sorry, I didn't see. Mara, please.
I'd say it's very important to find the right partners to scale your idea, especially if you want to go that road where you need partners to do it. So, I mean, in any business venture, finding the right partner is difficult. And I feel like for social business, that would be the same.
Yes, I surely agree that every business has to do it, but in the context of social enterprises, you surely have the particular challenge that you have to make sure that you have to some extent the same mindset, right? Or you have the same goals, and perhaps you have a larger diversity of partners. Most businesses or many businesses can grow and thrive without communicating with polity a lot, right? While for many social enterprises, politics and public authorities are relevant stakeholders. Roman, please.
Yeah, I think not just for social, like mostly for social enterprises, but also for normal enterprises and small businesses, financing is a huge issue. Because like for small enterprises which are not socially oriented, they might still get funding, but I think it's even harder to get funding for projects which are like non-profit oriented. And you really have to find the right people to support you in that way, because you have to stay operational even in harder times, and without money, that's a hard thing to do.
Yeah, so raising money surely is an issue for most social enterprises. You have fewer possibilities, as you said, than other types of companies. In particular, many social enterprises have only limited revenues or do not focus on profit, at least. And so it's surely more difficult to attract typical or traditional investors. Florian.
Yes, I wanted to add, it's like not only about finding the right partners, but finding partners at all. Because when I think about the repair cafe, you first need to like get some visibility, that people are aware at one hand that you exist, that people come there to get stuff repaired, and of course to find the people who are able to repair the stuff and are willing to work there for probably no or just small wages.
Yeah, it's completely on a voluntary basis. So I think it's another point that you don't have necessarily only employees who you work with, but it's mainly volunteers on whose support you rely, which makes it even more difficult to, on the one hand, identifying them. You really have to have a good knowledge of the community and of the circumstances, and to motivating them and keeping their motivation up. Simon. Sorry, I think you freeze.
Finding the right partners, but also sometimes finding the beneficial.
Now you're back, I think. Now you're back.
I'm sorry. It's not only about finding the partners, but also about finding the beneficiaries sometimes. It depends, of course, on the case. But for example, I had a guest lecture of someone who it was an initiative to help women who've been victims of human trafficking and sexual abuse, and said to build it, especially because that's in the first place, and that took a lot of time.
Yeah, so identifying not only suppliers and employees, but also identifying and motivating customers to actually become customers or beneficiaries is not so easy. So I think the example of sexual harassment surely is one. Not everybody wants to openly speak about it and be part of or be identified as a customer of these services, but also perhaps when you think of the Grameen case again, right? So one aspect was that the employees of Grameen were going to the rural population, to the people, in order to reach out to them, because they would never think of going to a bank, because this was something which was completely out of their way of thinking. So sometimes it's really also you need to motivate beneficiaries because they would not think about being actually the ones who might be addressed by someone. Annika.
I wanted to touch on the topic on investments, that they are also come with certain risks. And especially, I think if we enter new areas which haven't touched our business model before, that we need to evaluate the risk beforehand. And also, I remember the business talk from the Cacao Academy, where she talked about having some micro experiments. I think it's a good way for social enterprises to face such that they don't face high risk or loss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think this idea of what risks are out there, and that there are probably additional ones to a traditional business, and how you overcome them is surely also an important hindrance to getting access to funding, right? It's really for many difficult to explore what impact it may have. To make a real business case is not as easy. Selina, you're up.
I think another challenge could be if you want to replicate a business model, for example, in a different country, and then you need to understand or maybe learn about the differences between the countries or between the two regions, so that you can make the necessary adaptations to your business model. Because maybe, for example, in the case of the beneficiaries, maybe I don't know, in the Netherlands, they really like bringing their broken things to a cafe and have them fixed. But then in another country, maybe they'd rather have someone come over, or I don't know, or there's maybe a barrier for just meeting up in a cafe with strangers. So I think it's also important to consider those differences before building the business in another environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's as you said, surely, as you all said, to sum up a little bit, about the resources that you have, the financial resources. How do I get the money to finance my scaling? But also, how do I get the stuff? How do I get the people in? Or in many cases, it's not only employees, but oftentimes working with volunteers with suggest additional challenges for an organization, right? So how do I keep motivation up over time? People now have, I don't know, students engaging in such an organization. This semester they have a lot of time. Next semester they're writing the master thesis. Then they cannot help anymore because they have other constraints. So it's really additional challenges when you work with people who you do not pay, right? How to acquire the knowledge to enter new markets surely is an important question. You know your community well, and you know that your model works here well, but this may, as you said, Selina, be completely different in a different context. And that why working with partners is something that many social enterprises and also other organizations do. But finding the right partners and also finding oftentimes the customers in different contexts, motivating them, making sure that they will be customers actually of your products or services is a particular challenge. It's also a question, what model does fit best for your organization, right? Not all growth and scaling models are a good fit. So really deciding of what makes sense and thinking through the different necessities. This is something that we'll focus on in the group work next week. There's a last comment, Philip?
Yes. Yeah, I just want to mention another challenge could possibly be that when scaling the business, you should basically still try to be focused and not lose the focus to what key problem you actually want to tackle. As there are so many problems out there, you might lose what you actually started with or wanted to focus on in the first place.
Yes, I think that's a very important point to, on the one hand, stick to the original plan, or to be aware if you change the plan. So when you take the example of Grameen, the basic goal they have is to increase living circumstances of the poor, right? But of course, what they did with the microfinance to really helping people to develop business models and to develop small firms themselves was something completely different than providing them mobile phones or the possibility to use mobile phones. So the detailed goals are different, but they are to some extent aligned. But you're fully right that you have to make sure that, in particular, when you work with cooperation partners or when you use even models of diffusion to scale your impact, where you have much less control over what happens, this is something that is difficult. And for many organizations, in particular, when they grow, there has also been the discussion about mission drift. So the risk that you actually, in order to finance your scaling and finance your growth, you have to adhere to expectations of investors in particular, and thus perhaps focus more strongly on the revenue side than on the impact side. So there is, of course, this risk as well. Okay, thank you very, very much for this great discussion. I hope we can, as I said, touch upon many of these points next week. But now I will hand over to Mikołaj and Oscar. I don't know who takes over.
So, hello there. Mikołaj will take over the presentation.
Yeah, I hope that you can hear me.
Yes, very well.
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for the first part of the lecture. Dominika is a great scholar. I always love to listen to her presentations. And it was very interesting discussion. I think some of the issues we are going to present together with Oscar somehow resonate with the issues you already raised in this discussion. So first, we're going to start with diffusion, and we'll start with very classical, quite old school approach to diffusion, but to have a kind of a base on which we're going to problematize it. And so the definition of diffusion in very thick classical book by Everett Rogers is that this is a process in which an innovation is communicated through certain channels over time among the members of social system. And we could say that this quite mechanistic or epidemic-like way of perceiving diffusion. As epidemic is a notion we are very familiar to all of us, so germs are spreading from one person to another and they become ill or contagious with it. And so we can imagine that certain products, services, or ideas, norms are jumping from one object to another in a population. This would be diffusion perceived as an epidemic. But we could also think about diffusion as an innovation, that actually when you diffuse...
we don't see your slide moving, actually.
No, I'm still on the first slide, don't worry. We could think...
But you might want to go into presentation mode, so we only see your slide. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm not sure what you are seeing, so I'm in the presentation.
So we see the whole PowerPoint screen.
Yeah, but we are not in the presentation. We don't see that, but it's not that important, I think. So we don't see the presentation mode.
Okay, thank you.
We see the slides on the left still, you know.
Okay, I'm going to change it. Sorry for this. That's better?
Now it works. Yes, perfect.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
It happens all the time, although I use Zoom and all these devices for more than 2 years now to teach. Okay. So we could also think about diffusion as an innovative and quite reflexive process. Yes, it's not only something is spreading from one person to another or one organization to another, like germs, but it requires some reflexive adaptation, being interpretive and thinking what you are taking from the others. Yeah? So basically the metaphor comes from chemistry and other hard sciences. Yes, probably every one of you made these exercises in your elementary school. I don't know, putting 2 drops of milk into coffee and seeing how it's changing the color and making the process faster by spinning the spoon, but it's in social environment, it also requires our agency, our reflexive thinking about do we want to adapt this new thing or why we are adapting, what we are adapting. So these are the issues we want to go through now. So in this classical thinking about diffusion, there are 4 elements of that process which are mentioned: innovation, communication, challenge, time, and social system. One small caveat about social system, that as it is one very important message from this course, is that many terms are used in social sciences in various meanings. So earlier in the examples presented by Dominika, we're talking about ecosystem. In this classical approach, it is social system, but sometimes we talk about networks, environment, or even social field. Yes, but by this we understand the environment of organizations, other actors with whom we interact, we adapt the thing which is being diffused. And I would like to walk you through these 4 elements of diffusions using the extremely old and classical example, but for me, it's very useful one, and sometimes when we try to present this new flashy, interesting things which we're diffusing, we forget about this classical study, which is now nearly 8 years old. So the case study of maybe something not very exciting, the diffusion of hybrid corn in Iowa, which is the paradigmatic study of how things diffuse. So what was the innovation in 20s? In American farming, it was discovered or engineered a kind of a corn which was much more efficient for farmers. They could harvest more than 20% larger harvest. But the disadvantage of this corn was that against the previous way of farming, they couldn't put aside some of seeds and use it next year. They had to buy new hybrid corn produced by the innovators. And so for that reasons, they were very reluctant to adapt this new innovation. Yeah, although if they would adapt it, they will have much higher revenues and they would be much productive. Actually, it's not very sustainable example. Yes, this is how the industrial agriculture on the big scale started in the world, and it changed our food products into something which is, let's say, not organic. So this is the first element. We have to think what is our innovation, which is diffusing. And with this element, you already started in previous classes. Yes, you already started building your models and you're experimenting with what you would like to be the solution for your problem, which is innovative in a way. But then in this classic study by Ryan and Gross, they noticed that what is super important is how the innovation is communicated. What are the communication channels from whom we are learning about this object, this service, this product we would like to adapt and diffuse. So what was interesting for the case of hybrid corn was that the early adopters learned about this hybrid corn from salesmen, from people who are simply advertising it and selling it. But there was just tiny group of them. But when it really took off and most of the farmers from Iowa started growing this new kind of hybrid corn, they rather use it as a legitimate for them valuable and recognized channel of communication, their neighbors. Yeah, so they didn't learn from the salesmen, they didn't trust them very much, they learned from the neighbors who started profiting with from using that corn. The third element is time. Yes, as diffusion is always a process which is taking time, and this has to be taken into account in your business models. I am totally aware that this is quite a truist statement, but you always have to take it into account, that it's not like you will present your idea and magically and the next day people start using it. In the case of corn, it was some people who were already applying the new kind of corn in their fields and then stepping back, realizing that they don't trust it. They experimented from 1 year and the next year they were refusing to use it, coming back to the old way of farming. Yes, if we talk about communication channels, it requires your neighbors to start implementing the new way of farming, and then you learn from them. So it took several years. This process was spanned for more than 10 years. The study about it was taken in the early 40s, but the innovation was invented in the 20s. So it took more than 15 years. And we could think about this time as an innovation decision process. First, you have to learn about the innovation. You have to actually know that there is that innovation somewhere. Yeah, then you have to be persuaded that actually it is fitting your needs. Sometimes, of course, as we know, entrepreneurs are informing us about the fact that we need something. Yes, needs are quite often created. Then you have to take the decision. After taking the decision, you start implementing the innovation in your local context, but it doesn't mean that you keep using that innovation. Then you have to go to the phase of confirmation to believe that it is really thing you are used to it. So that's what we would like to highlight, that this is process in time, and you always have to think about diffusion as a temporal thing. And the last element about which we already started talking is that you have to have an idea about social system in which the diffusion occurs. And we already in your discussion were talking in what context things are diffusing, yes, or are scaling up. In that case, it was a Iowa farming community, which is of course consisting of farmers, but also of people selling seeds, veterinarians who are very important experts for farmers, and all other actors, university where at the agricultural department the new seeds were invented, local authorities, companies buying seeds and corn back from the farmers. So this was that system which was interesting here. Yes, in the case of Cocoa Academy, you saw in the presentation by Domika what was the ecosystem in which this new innovation was scaling up. So you always have to take into account what is the surrounding, who are the stakeholders involved, not only the ones to whom you are going to, your innovation is going to be passed, but also the ones who might be opposing it, or the ones who are not going to use it, but because they are recognized as experts, as in case of veterinarians in the story of hybrid corn, they might be referred to people who are still considering to use the innovation. Okay, let's go to the newer examples, which are going to be presented by Oskar.
Hi, so I would like to present the aspect of diffusion of the norm of climate policy, or actually climate neutrality targets, and something that could also be called the cascadization of a specific norm. So one country is adopting a norm and then it diffuses or cascades to other countries that are following the example. And I'm sure that all of you are aware of the great challenge of climate change that is in front of us. And or actually already we are experiencing the first signs of it. And currently the global community is going through a climate change of more than 2.5 degrees by the end of this century. But there is some good message that the advancement of technologies, but also of let's say the race of this topic on the political agenda is generating some slow but noticeable progress. And if I may ask for the next slide. Here you can see a map of countries in the world that have committed to achieve climate neutrality. Actually, this map is lacking India, that joined the club a few months ago. But this is really something that the climate neutrality diffusion or cascadization of this norm is really something that started a few years back in the most highly developed Western European countries with, let's say, traditionally strong leaning towards pro-environmental policies. So think about the Nordics, maybe some smaller Western European countries. But in the last 2 or 3 years, we could see a raise of this topic among the big EU players. So first, notably France, and then after some hesitations, also Germany, that led to the adoption of a climate neutrality target at EU level in December 2019. And okay, we could argue that this is only the EU responsible for 8% of the emissions. But what's turned out that together with the change of the administration in the United States, also the US agreed to adopt such a 2050 climate neutrality target. But then even countries that probably before few would expect, as China, joined. And actually China, with its 2060 climate neutrality target, joined after some Asian countries, so Japan and South Korea, notably, because if South Korea does something, then obviously Japan has to answer, and the other way around. So when they declared their targets, also China followed. And to put it into perspective, if China would reach the target of achieving climate neutrality by 2060, it would mean that global temperatures would rise by 0.3% degree less than without reaching the target. So it is really visible that it started from a small number of countries, but step by step, this was more and more, let's say, cascading towards countries more hesitant. So first within the European Union, and then some countries globally, like Costa Rica or New Zealand, joined this pack. But then suddenly it became almost, I would say, a mainstream that, don't get me wrong, we are still very far from really achieving this target, but countries kind of had to position themselves, and it is, let's say, a no-go to not have any meaning on limiting your emissions to zero. So I believe that this is, from the last few years, a great example of how norms can scale up, as we could also call it, scale up at the nation level from the, let's say, entrepreneurs of this norm, these most active players, towards the more hesitant players within the global climate policy discussion. So thanks.
Okay, and now I would like to present you a very peculiar extreme case of diffusion, something newer. I hope that some of you are familiar with it. Pretty sure that the ones of you who are from Mannheim and Heidelberg, you've heard about Industrie 4.0. We translate it into English as Industry 4.0. Although in some other countries, the similar idea functions as an industry of future. Yeah? So it's connected with the so-called fourth industrial revolution, combining production methods with communication technology, Internet of Things, increased digitalization of economy and society. And the actual term Industrie 4.0 was invented in Germany. The first use was in 2011, and it got very popular in the German-speaking context. But similar terms as industry of future, I think this is how it is, or industrial internet are used in other countries. So the story, and here I'm using the research by my colleague Uli Meyer, who used to work at the, I think, University of Technology of München. Now he works in Austria. First, he studied how the Industry 4.0 was diffusing in the German context, in various contexts in Germany, and then we started comparing how it is jumping to another country, and we started together following how it diffuses into Poland. But first, we start the story of the diffusion of the idea in Germany. Yeah, so the idea that all the factories are going to be smart, they're going to mostly use robots, not workers, and the German economy will had another bust of development thanks to that fact. Yes, industrial, but digital at the same time. And so the term was used for the first time 11 years ago in 2011, but the first popularization of it was during the Hanover Messe, famous fairs in Hanover in 2012, and then it started getting its momentum. Yes, in 2016, it was really huge thing in Germany. And we have a couple of examples how it was entering very peculiar and different context. So first case, people started talking about consulting 4.0. Yeah, but of course, it's not consulting, it's maybe not industrial production, but it has its digital aspects, so maybe it makes some sense. Yeah, of course, then it was Arbeit, which means work in English. Well, it obviously is connected to the initial idea, because people working in this digitalized factories had to approve a change, adapt somehow to the new working conditions. Yeah, but then we could see an example of restaurants which were changing into that approach when people started talking about gastronomy 4.0. After it entered the field of gastronomy, there started being some products advertised, like simply sparkling or not sparkling water, which was this new cool 4.0 water. And there was even discussion about past, present, and the future of water, water 4.0. Apotheker, which means pharmacy in German, they could also be digital and connected through broadband internet in a way, or at least it was simply cooler brand for this drugstore. If we could talk about shops using that brand, then we could also think about leisure industry and sightseeing in the 4.0 mode. So there were also companies advertising that they have some services for tourists using that kind of approach to the economy. Then it entered the political context, and some politicians started talking about, well, of course, it is still connected with the economy. Wirtschaft is economy in German, but still CSU politicians in Bayern were focused for highlighting that their approach to the economy is connected with their vision of future of Germany, and they're talking about this new way of running economic affairs in Germany. Next logical step was thinking about Deutschland 4.0. So Germany, the next phase of Germany is, well, I know that Germany as a state has history of playing with numbers, but here you have the example of Germany 4.0, which is the total transformation of not only economy, but also society and maybe even political system. But why not only stopping about on political environment? There were also people who started talking about Himmel 4.0, which means heaven. Yes, so it also entered the realm of theological discussions. Yeah, but these are all contexts in Germany where the idea of new modes of production and providing services started jumping. But we witnessed that a few years later, it also became very interesting in Polish context. So in Polish strategy of sustainable development, our government in 2017 also started using the term of Industry 4.0. What was very interesting, they were not never saying that they are borrowing the idea from its original source, Germany. It was like something coming from the modernized center of thinking about economy under the English label of Industry 4.0. But what they were explaining by using this name was that they want to actually make Polish economy reindustrialized. So they were not very much highlighting the aspect of digital economy, but simply developing more factories and creating more traditional workplaces for workers. Of course, qualified workers, but they were not talking very much about robots, digital connections between infrastructure. And then in Polish context, it also started arriving in also other various niches. Like we had a conference already 3 years ago at one of the universities about the idea of University 4.0. It was kind of an anticipation where we are doing at the universities during the pandemics, where we had to be connected to digital solutions. But at that time, it was thinking about some new way of organizing science and teaching. At some point, this is the picture actually I took in one of the bars of Warsaw. You could also saw the drinks named using that name. Here you can see what is the ingredients of drink Negroni 4.0. And I will stop with Negroni. Unfortunately, we cannot serve you any drinks now. It's too early for it. But my question for the short discussion is, what actually was diffusing here? And what is our lesson for your strategies of scaling up from the story of the diffusion of Industry 4.0 in various contexts in Germany, and then outside of Germany, various contexts in Poland?
I think what was really diffusing there was more like term 4.0 for something new. not just the industry context, but for something new in general, even though it was not the first generation, even though it was not the fourth generation, like 4.0 was associated with anything which was kind of made in a new way.
I also saw that one more person raised her hand or his hand.
Yeah, I pretty much wanted to say the same, but you could really see that in the beginning, the idea of 4.0 was the same, but the more it diffused, the more the idea kind of got away from digitization to just a signal for something being new.
Yeah, my message from this example is that at some point it's just labels started spreading, yes, and it was departing more and more from the original idea. Although we think that in that case, original idea is quite blurred. It's not very easy to explain what actually Industry 4.0 is. So it's easier to play with these ambiguous things when they're, yes, it wouldn't be so easy for a product like a new hybrid corn to be diffusing in that way. But here it started diffusing in a way like fashion or fads are diffusing, yes. All people who wanted to, or organizations who wanted to signal that they are modern, up to date, or cool, started using it. And my kind of a message for your project is that and it was already also highlighted by Dominika in her presentation, that in that case of scaling up, you're losing the control over what's scaling up or it's being diffused. It's not always know what is going to happen. If you are simply advertising the idea, trying to persuade other to use the best practice you are offering, or the service you would like to have replicated in other contexts. Yes, so it could be adapted in different contexts in very even kinky ways. Yes, very surprising or contradictory, and still people might be believing that they belong to the same movement of people who are applying this new approach. Okay, now I would like to pass the floor to Oskar.
Yes. So when speaking about the diffusion or the scaling up of certain let's say advancements, there can also be something that is quite contrary. So in the 1930s, Dutch journalist Jan Romein, when visiting the United Kingdom, noticed that many street lights were actually street lighting was still using just a natural gas light source rather than electric light that was already very common in the Netherlands. And as it turned out, this was because the UK was one of the first countries in the world that on a wide scale included lighting on the streets, and also using just a gas technology that was then the only technology available. And what turns out is that when you first develop a technology, so you are a first mover, then you actually might lose your advantage in the future. So he then created a concept of the first mover disadvantage, or dialectics of lead. So what he even named the law of the handicap of a head start. So you move first, you have some advantage at the beginning, but then later you might lose it because others can scale up more advanced technology. And actually there is also a mirror of this law, so that lagging behind allows you to stimulate a development leading to a long-term advantage, actually. So this is more, let's say, the idea of jumping through some, let's say, more basic technology immediately to the most, let's say, advanced technique that is available. So which is sometimes used in the discussion around sustainability, around clean energy sources, leapfrogging, so that you can, for instance, leave the technology of natural gas use in the energy sector when jumping from coal, not through natural gas to clean technologies, but you immediately jump from coal technologies to clean. So, for instance, renewable energy sources or nuclear power. And on the next slide, I would like to use an example that is very, let's say, easy to imagine. This is the advancement of and introduction of card payments in Poland. So Poland, as a country that was previously under a different economic and political system, did not have a very well developed or a very poorly developed card payment system. Actually, in the 1990s, it was still common that if you wanted to pay by card in a store in the early 90s, then it was possible, but then they had to call your bank with providing the number of your credit card. So that was the system how it worked. And in the US, it was already in the 70s, there were systems that allowed to do that, IT systems that allowed to do that. But actually, because this technology was so unpopular in Poland, it rose very, very rapidly, 28-fold since between 2004 and 2020. And actually, what also happened is that by the introduction of a technology, they could, let's say, skip the most common technologies and jump immediately to the most modern payment methods that were available. And starting from approximately 2012, the cashless payment providers started to provide the contactless payments terminals, and also all the banks started to massively give their clients cards, credit cards, debit cards that had the opportunity, that gave you the possibility to pay contactless. And actually, I think that this is, as quite a large group from this course is from Germany, then probably you might be aware that Germany is actually a country that, at least until very recently, was quite known for having a very strong dedication towards paying by cash, that credit cards or even debit cards payments were quite often, or are still, not accepted in different places. And also, I have been in Germany for many times in the last 10 years. I have seen a slow change in this direction, that now these contactless payments are more and more available. But this is also interesting in the way that these cashless payments were seen by all participants, so both by the consumers as something that is very convenient, because now even you take your phone, you pay at the store, but also for the medium and small enterprises that had to often put upfront some costs for introducing this technology. Still, they saw this as a rational choice, and not only because, oh, I need this technology because my clients will probably demand it and they will not have any cash with them, and then they will go to my competitor at the other side of the street. But it was also including that the shop owners at their own had a feeling that such technologies are just important, and they are also, let's say, they believe that this is the right way to develop. So it was not only about a purely rational choice of these shop owners that wanted to attract more consumers, but that they also really firmly believe that this is the right, let's say, technological advancement. And if we go to the next slide, we could see that this is already data from 4 years ago, but it is probably even more striking than if we would make it today, that some countries from Central and Eastern Europe, or even, let's say, from the Caucasus region, Georgia, are the countries with the highest share of contactless payments in all card payments. So I personally cannot remember myself paying by putting my card into the ATM system or the payment system at the store. And you can here clearly see that, let's say, the most advanced European economies like the Netherlands or Germany, Switzerland, the United Kingdom are actually much lower in the share of contactless payments than, let's say, the Central Eastern European countries. So I think this is a really interesting example how you can benefit from the lower level of technological advancement, and then just leapfrog to the newest technology that is available. And obviously, this is not a life-changing experience, but still, I think we can all agree it is making, let's say, your daily life a little bit easier. And then if we go to the next slide. We have to watch out, though, with scaling up, and I think this is something that was already partly raised by the 4.0 discussion. That sometimes the scaling up and also, let's say, the diffusion of a specific norm can turn out very awkward. So there is the theory, or actually the concept of the cargo cult. And this was something that was observed by, let's say, the Western powers since at least the 19th century, was that the people, the native population of Melanesia, so the islands in the Pacific, so Polynesia, for instance, were copying on their own manner. They were copying techniques or objects that they have seen that Western people, let's say Americans or Brits, used. And this was very, very evident and visible during the Second World War, when the Americans were trying to hold ground on and advancing on the islands from the east, advancing to the western direction towards Japan. When they landed with their planes, they were delivering various goods, right, cargo. And this actually turned out to a very, we could say awkward situation, where the indigenous population tried to replicate these objects that brought the goods. So from the sky, some goods were delivered to the local people, and they started to build planes on their own. And here you can see a picture of how these planes look like. So the message I have here is that not always things appear as they are, and also by scaling up and by let's say taking over some technology or some idea, it does not always work exactly on the same way as we imagined. And if I may ask, because I still had the last slide. The results can be quite unexpected. And here again, an example of Poland, of the opening of the first McDonald's in 1992. On the right side, you can see a picture, all these fancy-looking people in their 1980s, early 1990s outfits. This is actually a true picture of the opening, where the whole, let's say, elite of the city of Warsaw, or political, cultural elite, came to see the symbol of the Western, let's say, civilization, and they could order finally a Big Mac with Coke and French fries. And while this drive was very obvious because the society has been isolated from such kind of things for many years, and probably for you German participants, you are also familiar with similar elements that were happening when the DDR was merging with the Western German parts. But I think this is a great example where you can see how the diffusion worked in a very awkward way. That while obviously the elites had the best access to information, the money to just spend for going out somewhere, they also, let's say, thought about this as a very, let's say, big event. So they dressed up in ties and so on. But actually nowadays, when we think about McDonald's, we really think about the junk food chain where we just go when we are tired or too drunk to prepare our own food, right? So this is I think an interesting example of how the scaling works differently and than intended. And my question to you is whether you can think of any other examples where in the process of a diffusion of certain approaches, so actually scaling them up in a new place, the message that actually was brought with this concept, so for instance with the McDonald's, got lost in translation, or actually was turned out to deliver different results than initially planned? And this is an open question to you.
I think the first thing that comes into my mind is, sadly, the buzzword sustainability, because I think
yes,
a lot of
I wanted to say that. Thank you.
yeah, I think a lot of companies are using this buzzword just like for some sort of greenwashing instead of actually valuing it and being behind it and acting on it. So like you can read purpose statements and vision statements with sustainability and purpose and like stuff like that, but it is just more like greenwashing instead of actually acting on it. So I think sustainability is probably the most prominent example.
Yeah, I think that is a great example. Actually, I just had one. If there would be silence, I was having that example of sustainability in my mind as a doomsday scenario. But yeah, indeed, and I think you can see some elements taking place here. So there is this concept is scaling up, but actually the result is not only, let's say, the pretendence of doing something rightly, but sometimes also actually the effects can be negative. So for instance, the plastic straw campaign was something that, let's be honest, like the impact of plastic straws for the whole environment is marginal, but the focus of the whole opinion focused on these straws that actually most of the people never need. And they were replaced by paper straws that are actually, which carbon footprint is higher than a plastic straw because it's heavier, you need paper to produce it and so on. And you actually need some very special substances that make the straw resistant for the use of water. So you have different consequences that are actually working in contrary of reaching these let's say, a big target of sustainability. So yeah, great example. Do you maybe know some other ones?
Yeah, I
yes, please.
Like for me, it has nothing to do with sustainability in a direct way, but I was thinking about luxury leather brands or luxury fashion brands like Chanel or some brands like this, who really are diffusing in a more brighter spectrum of customers, and are now raising up prices and destroying kind of their own products to lower the lower the number of products they're offering, so it becomes more luxury again.
Mm-hmm. But how do you see the, let's say, the diffusion or the scaling up part? in it. So scaling up your, let's say, your impact and the power of your brand by destroying parts of your products in order to keep the price and the prestige of the product as high as possible. Do you mean that?
Yeah, I think in the first place, the idea was to achieve diffusion kind of in the society, to get more people to buy it. But then on the other side, they lost their image of being just a brand that's bought and used by a very small number of people. And so now they are backlashing to reducing kind of the products they are bringing to the market. And they're reducing the availability on the market to regain that old image.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good example as well. So I see that we are running out of time. So I think that
perhaps we can take the last one comment. Simon had one idea, please. And then we can close up. You're right.
Yes.
Okay, then real quick. My example is quite controversial, I would say, but I was thinking about Albert Einstein, who said energy and mass is equal and so on, and that scaled also somehow in the effect that we now have nuclear weapons, right? So I think that was also not on purpose. That's what I was thinking about.
Yeah, I think that there are some in the history of the development of various products. I heard about the Nespresso machine, that the guy who invented it never thought about it, that it would be used on a supermassive scale, and that it is maybe it's just an urban legend that he is basically really depressed about the fact that it is just used by people to make their life more comfortable because they don't have to waste 1.5 seconds to pour coffee into the coffee machine, right? So that this is something that also now was not really expected and escalated quickly. So yeah, I think these are also good examples. So I think that the message, or let's say the idea I wanted to raise during this part of the presentation was that you when thinking further about your projects, you can also try to include that idea of, okay, will this development do, let's say, the thing that is intended to, or do you maybe already see some areas where actually the development might go in a direction that might not be, let's say, the core business of your work, and this might be good, but maybe this can also be harmful, and obviously you cannot have an idea about every possible development, but maybe such a, let's say, double check of this how the scaling could go might be beneficial in order to make your design your idea more robust. So thanks. So we have the last slide with the for next week.
Yes. Yeah. So thank you, Oscar, and all the participants for the great discussions. That was really fun again. We will put online some readings that we don't necessarily expect you to prepare for next week, but I think it will make studying the group work easier. Some of them are rather short. The article by Yunus you already know. Some are a little bit longer, like there is and rather praxis oriented, right? Some from Gabriel 2014. It's really a collection from the organization Nesta of what are successful strategies. It's an easy read, so it might be really interesting to prepare yourself for your group work. I have added one last thing on the slide, so which is to watch the videos from the airbook that I have indicated. But yeah, it's more or less optional, but I think it would be helpful for starting the group work to bringing some ideas into your mind more clearly. Reading through some case studies, that would surely be helpful. Okay. So for now, thank you again for the great participation and for listening to us. We hope it's been interesting to learn about how you can grow your organization and also how you can more broadly spread ideas potentially contributing to societal change in a way that is intended to some extent, although there are always also unintended consequences. So thanks for the great cases, Miko and Oscar. And see you next week at 3:30 for the group work session. So tomorrow at the latest, we will upload all the slides and the video and all the readings. Thank you. See you next week.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you for the
Thank you very
discussion.
much. Bye.
Bye.